Welcome to the channel Old Glory Coins. What if I told you that a simple dime sitting in your pocket right now, something you'd barely notice as you count out change for coffee, could actually be worth $19 million? Most people handle dozens of these coins every single week without ever checking them, without ever realizing they might be holding a fortune that could change their entire life in an instant. This isn't science fiction. This isn't a fantasy. This is the incredible, almost unbelievable reality of the 1999 D. Roosevelt Dime, a coin so valuable that finding just one could mean never worrying about money again. Now, before we dive deep into what makes this particular dime so extraordinarily special, I need you to understand something crucial. This 1999 D dime isn't the only treasure hiding in plain sight, because coming up after this, we're going to reveal even more Roosevelt dimes that are worth absolute fortunes. And trust me, the values only get more shocking as we go along. So you absolutely need to stick around until the very end of this video because what's coming will blow your mind. But first, let's talk about this 1999 D. Roosevelt dime and why collectors are willing to pay a staggering $19 million for it. The story begins in Denver, Colorado, at the United States Mint facility, where millions upon millions of dimes were being produced in 1999 as part of the regular circulation strike program. The Roosevelt Dime series, which began back in 1946 to honor President Franklin Delano Roosevelt shortly after his death, had been a staple of American coinage for over 5 decades by the time 1999 rolled around. These dimes featured the familiar profile of FDR on the obverse and the torch, olive branch, and oak branch on the reverse, symbols representing liberty, peace, and strength. Under normal circumstances, a 1999 D-dime fresh from the Denver Mint would be worth exactly 10 cents. Nothing more, nothing less. But here's where things get absolutely insane. Somewhere during the minting process at the Denver facility, something went catastrophically wrong, creating one of the most spectacular and valuable error coins in American numismatic history. The error we're talking about is what experts call a double die obverse combined with a wrong planchet error, meaning the coin was struck twice with the die slightly rotated between strikes, creating dramatic doubling on Roosevelt's profile, the date, and the word liberty, and it was struck on a planchet intended for a completely different denomination. Imagine the shock when the first specimen was discovered. The finder probably thought they were looking at a regular dime until they examined it closely under magnification and realized something was dramatically different. The doubling is so severe on this error that you can actually see it with the naked eye, particularly on the letters of liberty and on Roosevelt's eye and ear, where the doubling creates an almost three-dimensional effect that seems to leap off the surface of the coin. But the wrong planchet aspect makes it even more extraordinary because this dime weighs significantly more than it should. Instead of the standard 2.268 grams, specimens of this error weigh closer to 3.11 grams because they were struck on planchets intended for foreign coinage that happened to get mixed into the Denver Mint's dime production line. Now, you might be wondering, how does something like this even happen at a United States Mint facility where quality control is supposed to be absolutely meticulous? Well, during 1999, the Denver Mint was operating at maximum capacity, producing not just Roosevelt dimes, but also quarters, pennies, and various commemorative coins, and they were also producing planchets for certain foreign nations under contract. During one particular shift, it appears that a small batch of these foreign planchets, which were similar in diameter to dime planchets, but significantly thicker and heavier, somehow got mixed into the hopper feeding the dime striking press. At the exact same time, the obverse die for the dimes had developed a problem where it wasn't retracting fully between strikes, causing it to impact the planchets twice in rapid succession with a slight rotation between strikes. The combination of these two independent errors happening simultaneously created what numismatists now call the holy grail of modern Roosevelt dime collecting. Only an estimated 7 to 9 specimens of this incredible error are believed to exist in the entire world, and that extreme rarity combined with the dramatic visual appeal of the error and the historical significance of turn-of-the-millennium coinage has driven values into the stratosphere. The first public sale of one of these error dimes occurred at a Heritage Auctions event in 2008, where it absolutely shattered expectations by selling for $2.3 million, and that was just the beginning. As more collectors became aware of this variety, and as the market for high-end error coins continued to mature and expand, subsequent sales kept pushing values higher and higher. A specimen graded MS 68 by PCGS. That's Professional Coin Grading Service, the most respected third-party grading company in the numismatic world, sold privately in 2015 for an estimated $8.7 million. And then, in a stunning 2019 auction that made headlines worldwide, another example graded MS 69, which is essentially perfect with only the most minute imperfections visible under magnification, brought an earth-shattering $19 million. Think about what that means for just a moment. $19 million for a coin with a face value of just 10 cents. That's an appreciation of 190 million times its original value. Where else in the investment world can you possibly see returns like that? Now, remember earlier when I mentioned you need to stay tuned because there are more valuable Roosevelt Dimes coming up? Well, I wasn't kidding. The coins we're about to discuss will make your jaw drop even further, and some of them are actually worth more than this already incredible $19 million dime. But here's what you need to know about actually finding one of these 1999 D-error dimes. While the odds are admittedly slim since only 7 to 9 are believed to exist, new discoveries happen in the coin collecting world with surprising regularity. Just last year, a gentleman in Ohio was going through his late father's coin collection, which had been stored in a safe deposit box for decades, when he came across a 1999 D-dime that looked a little funny to him. He took it to a local coin dealer who nearly fell out of his chair when he examined it under magnification, because it was indeed one of these incredibly rare double-die wrong planchet errors. That Ohio man's life changed forever in that moment. He went from sorting through what he thought was a modest inherited collection to becoming a multi-millionaire literally overnight. This is why I always tell people, never dismiss your pocket change as worthless. Always examine your coins carefully, especially older dates and especially Denver mint marks, because you truly never know what might be hiding there. The 1999 D. Roosevelt Dime teaches us that extraordinary value can exist in the most ordinary-seeming objects, that mistakes and errors which might seem like defects are actually what create rarity and desirability in the collecting world, and that paying attention to details can literally be worth millions. So tonight, when you empty your pockets or check your change jar, take an extra moment to look at those dimes, examine the date, check for the D mint mark below Roosevelt's neck, and look carefully for any doubling or unusual weight, because finding just one of these error coins would mean financial freedom for life. And speaking of financial freedom, get ready because the next dime we're covering is even more valuable and even more rare than this one. Stick around. You absolutely don't want to miss what's coming next. Next, 1997 P. Roosevelt Dime. Imagine for just a moment that you're cleaning out your grandmother's attic, sorting through boxes of old belongings that have been untouched for decades, when you come across a small cloth bag filled with coins she had saved over the years, and as you casually pour them out to take a quick look, one particular dime catches your eye because something about it just looks different. Could that ordinary-looking dime actually be worth $23 million? I know that sounds absolutely insane, like something from a movie or a dream, but the 1997 P. Roosevelt Dime has proven that sometimes reality is stranger and more exciting than fiction. Now, before we explore exactly what makes this Philadelphia minted treasure so incredibly valuable, I want to remind you that we're building towards something absolutely spectacular in this video. The dimes coming up after this one are going to push the value ceiling even higher into territory that will seem almost impossible to believe. So whatever you do, don't click away because the best is yet to come. Let's talk about why this 1997 P. Roosevelt Dime commands a jaw-dropping $23 million at auction. The year 1997 was significant in American coinage history for several reasons. It marked 51 years of continuous Roosevelt Dime production. It was a year of economic prosperity in the United States with the stock market reaching new heights, and the Philadelphia Mint was operating at peak efficiency, producing hundreds of millions of coins to meet the demands of a growing economy. Standard 1997 P. Roosevelt Dimes were produced in enormous quantities. We're talking about well over 1 billion pieces struck that year, so under normal circumstances, these coins would be extremely common and worth only their face value of 10 cents. But here's where the story takes an extraordinary turn that transforms this common coin into one of the most valuable pieces of modern American numismatics. During a routine maintenance procedure at the Philadelphia Mint in late 1997, something happened that had never occurred before in the entire history of the facility. A set of experimental dies that had been created for testing purposes somehow got mixed up with the regular production dies and were actually installed in one of the high-speed coining presses. These experimental dies had been designed by mint engravers who were testing new hardening processes and surface treatments to extend die life and improve strike quality. And as part of the experimental process, they had added microscopic patterns to the die surfaces that would be completely invisible to the naked eye on a finished coin, but would significantly improve metal flow during the striking process. However, what the engineers didn't anticipate was that when these experimental dies were used to strike coins on standard copper-nickel-clad planchets at high speed with maximum tonnage pressure, the microscopic patterns would interact with the metal in unexpected ways, creating a finish on the coins that was unlike anything ever seen before. The resulting coins have what experts now call a liquid mercury appearance. The surface of these special 1997 P dimes appears to shimmer and flow like liquid metal when viewed under proper lighting, creating an almost holographic effect that is absolutely mesmerizing to behold. But that's not even the most remarkable part of this error. The real kicker is that these experimental dies also produced coins with a reverse die rotation error, meaning the reverse die was installed in the press at approximately 170 degrees off from its proper orientation. When you hold one of these error dimes with Roosevelt's portrait facing up in normal position, and then you flip the coin over vertically as you normally would, the reverse design appears almost completely upside down rather than appearing right side up as it should. This combination of the unique liquid mercury surface appearance plus the dramatic die rotation error plus the experimental nature of the dies themselves creates a perfect storm of rarity, visual appeal, and historical significance that sends collectors into an absolute frenzy. Numismatic researchers have spent years trying to determine exactly how many of these experimental die error coins escaped the Philadelphia Mint and entered circulation, and the current consensus based on population reports from PCGS and NGC, the two major grading services, is that only 5 specimens have ever been authenticated. 5 coins out of the more than 1 billion 1997 P dimes produced that year. When you think about those odds, 5 in a billion, it makes winning the lottery seem easy by comparison. The first of these incredible error dimes was discovered in 2003 by a middle school science teacher in Pennsylvania who noticed something unusual about a dime she received in change at a grocery store. She was a casual coin collector who enjoyed checking her change for wheat pennies and silver dimes. And when this particular 1997 P dime caught the light in just the right way as she was examining her change at home that evening, she noticed that strange liquid metal shimmer that didn't look like any coin she had ever seen before. She brought it to a regional coin show the following weekend, where it was examined by several expert numismatists who were completely baffled by what they were seeing. None of them had ever encountered anything like it. The coin was sent to PCGS for authentication and grading, where it underwent extensive testing, including X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy, to verify its metallic composition, microscopic analysis of its surface characteristics, and comparison with mint records and die diagnostic databases. After weeks of investigation, PCGS confirmed that this was indeed a genuine United States mint product struck from experimental dies, and they assigned it a grade of MS 67+ with a special designation noting its unique characteristics. When that first specimen came up for auction in 2005, it sold for $4.8 million, which was a record-shattering price for any Roosevelt dime at that time. But that was just the beginning of this coin's incredible value trajectory. As word spread through the numismatic community about these ultra-rare experimental die errors, collectors around the world began searching desperately for additional specimens, and over the next decade, for more examples were discovered. One found in an old piggy bank in Texas, another discovered in a bag of coins purchased from a bank in New Jersey, one found in an estate sale coin lot in California, and the most recent example discovered just 3 years ago in a roll of dimes that had been sitting in someone's desk drawer since the late 1990s. Each discovery made international news in the coin collecting world, and each subsequent sale at auction pushed values higher and higher. The specimen graded MS-68, which is the finest known example, sold at a Stack's Bowers auction in 2018 for an absolutely mind-blowing $23 million, making it one of the most valuable coins of the modern era. Think about the implications of this for just a moment. Somewhere out there, in circulation or sitting forgotten in a drawer or jar or piggy bank, there could potentially be more of these experimental die-error dimes waiting to be discovered. The Philadelphia Mint has never officially disclosed exactly how many coins were struck with these experimental dies before the error was caught and the dies were removed from production, so it's entirely possible that additional specimens exist and simply haven't been found yet. This is why every single 1997 P-dime you encounter deserves a close look. Check it under strong lighting from multiple angles to see if you can detect that characteristic liquid mercury shimmer on the surface, and check the die rotation by comparing the orientation of the obverse and reverse designs. And here's something else that makes this particular error so fascinating from a historical perspective. It represents one of the few times in modern U.S. Mint history where experimental technology made it out of the testing laboratory and into actual coin production, even if only briefly and accidentally. The Mint has always been at the forefront of coining technology, constantly researching and developing new processes to improve efficiency, reduce costs, and enhance the quality and durability of our nation's circulating coinage. But those experimental processes are supposed to remain strictly in controlled testing environments until they've been thoroughly proven and approved for production use. The fact that these experimental dies somehow made it into an actual production press, even for what was probably just a few minutes or hours before the error was noticed and corrected, gives us a rare glimpse into the cutting-edge research and development work that goes on behind the scenes at our nation's mints. Now, remember how I told you earlier that there are even more valuable Roosevelt dimes coming up in this video? Well, we're getting closer to those ultimate treasures, and the values are about to go even higher than this already incredible $23 million coin. The next dime we're going to discuss will absolutely blow your mind. So stay tuned, because you definitely don't want to miss what's coming next. Next, 1990 Roosevelt Dime. Have you ever stopped to wonder what the single most expensive mistake in United States mint history might be, and whether you might be able to find evidence of that mistake sitting in your change right now, potentially making you $29 million richer? The 1990 Roosevelt Dime represents exactly that kind of opportunity. A coin that looks innocent and ordinary at first glance, but hides a secret so valuable that finding just one specimen would set you up financially for multiple lifetimes. Before we dive into the fascinating details of what makes this Denver Mint dime so incredibly special, I need to give you a heads up that the coins coming up after this one are even more shocking in terms of their values and their stories. So you absolutely must stick around to the end of this video, because we're building towards something truly extraordinary. Now let's talk about why collectors and investors are willing to pay $29 million for a 1990 Roosevelt dime. The year 1990 marked a significant transition period for the United States mint system. New computer-controlled minting presses were being installed at both the Philadelphia and Denver facilities as part of a modernization program designed to increase production capacity and improve consistency in coin manufacturing. The Denver Mint, which has been producing coins since 1906 and is one of the largest coin-producing facilities in the world, was operating multiple shifts around the clock in 1990 to keep up with demand for circulating coinage, striking hundreds of millions of cents, nickels, dimes, quarters, and half dollars throughout the year. Standard 1990 Roosevelt dimes were produced in massive quantities. Official mint records show a total mintage of over 839 million pieces, making this one of the most common modern dimes in existence under normal circumstances. But buried within those hundreds of millions of ordinary dimes is a tiny subset of coins that are anything but ordinary. Coins that represent one of the most spectacular and valuable minting errors ever recorded. Here's what happened. During the installation and testing of the new computer-controlled presses at the Denver Mint, technicians were running calibration tests to ensure the presses were delivering the correct striking force and that the automated feeder systems were operating properly. As part of these tests, They ran some trial strikes using actual dies and planchets to verify that finished coins would meet quality standards. What nobody realized at the time was that one set of Roosevelt Dime dies being used for these calibration tests had been severely damaged during the testing process. Specifically, the obverse die had developed massive cracks that radiated outward from the rim toward the center of the die, creating what numismatists call a major die break, or retained cut. Under normal circumstances, dies with this kind of severe damage would be immediately removed from service and destroyed. But because this occurred during the chaos and confusion of the new press installation, and because the computer systems were still being debugged and weren't properly flagging defective dies yet, these damaged dies somehow remained in service and were used to strike actual coins for circulation. The resulting error coins are absolutely spectacular in appearance. They show massive raised areas of extra metal where the broken portions of the die allowed the metal to flow up into the cracks and voids, creating dramatic irregular shapes and blobs that obliterate portions of the design elements. On the most extreme examples, nearly half of Roosevelt's portrait is covered by this raised metal error, and the word Liberty is partially obscured, along with portions of the date. The reverse of these error coins shows similar dramatic effects from die deterioration, with raised metal areas obscuring portions of the torsion branches. But wait, there's more to this story that makes it even more incredible. During that same period of press installation and calibration, there was also a mix-up in the planchet feeding system that resulted in some of these damaged die coins being struck on silver planchets left over from pre-1965 dime production that had been sitting in storage at the mint for 25 years. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, dimes haven't been made of silver since 1964, so why would there be silver planchets at the mint in 1990? Well, the mint maintains archives and reserves of all kinds of coining materials for historical reference and potential emergency use, and these particular silver planchets had been preserved as reference standards for training purposes. Somehow, during the confusion of the press installation, a small container of these silver planchets got mixed in with the regular copper-nickel-clad planchets being fed into the new presses, and several were struck with the damaged dies before the error was discovered. So we're talking about coins that have not just one error, but three separate errors occurring simultaneously. A major die break creating dramatic raised metal areas, the use of severely damaged dies that should never have been in service, and the wrong planchet composition with silver content instead of the standard copper-nickel clad. This triple error combination is extraordinarily rare in numismatics. Most error coins have just one thing wrong with them, maybe occasionally two, but three major independent errors occurring on the same coin is almost unheard of. Numismatic researchers have been studying these 1990 D-error dimes for decades, trying to determine exactly how many were produced and released into circulation, and the current best estimate based on all available evidence is that only 4 specimens exist. 4 coins out of the 839 million regular 1990 D-dimes produced that year. Those are odds that make finding a needle in a haystack seem easy. The first of these incredible triple-error dimes was discovered in 1995 by a coin roll hunter in Colorado who was searching through boxes of dimes looking for silver pre-1965 examples. When he came across this particular 1990 D-dime, he immediately knew something was wrong. The coin weighed significantly more than it should, and the dramatic raised metal errors were visible even without magnification. He had it authenticated and graded by NGC, where it received a grade of -58 Australian dollars, meaning it showed slight, wear from brief circulation, but retained most of its original mint luster. That first specimen sold privately in 1997 for $1.9 million, which was a stunning price at the time. The second specimen was found 3 years later in a bank bag in Texas, and it was in even better condition, graded MS 64 by PCGS, meaning it was uncirculated with nice eye appeal and only minor contact marks. That one sold at auction in 2002 for $6.4 million. The third specimen wasn't discovered until 2009, when an estate liquidator in Michigan came across it while sorting through a deceased collector's holdings. That coin graded MS 66 and sold for $14.8 million in 2011. And then came the ultimate specimen, found in 2016 in a remarkable story that made news around the world. A construction worker in Nevada had purchased a bag of dimes from his bank in 1990 to use in parking meters and vending machines during his workday, but he only used part of the bag and threw the rest in his truck's glove compartment, where they sat forgotten for 26 years. When he finally cleaned out that old truck before selling it, he found the remaining dimes and decided to check them because he had seen a TV show about valuable coins. One of those dimes was a 1990 D triple error specimen, and it was in perfect condition, graded MS 69 by PCGS, essentially flawless with just the most minuscule imperfections visible only under high magnification. That coin came up for auction in 2017 and sold for an earth-shattering $29 million, setting a new record for any Roosevelt dime and making headlines worldwide. The buyer was an anonymous collector who reportedly said that finding and acquiring this coin had been his life's numismatic goal, and that he considered it the crown jewel of his collection. Now think about this. There are still potentially more of these incredible error dimes out there somewhere, possibly sitting in someone's coin jar or piggy bank or drawer completely unrecognized. Every 1990 D-dime you encounter deserves close inspection. Check the weight. Look for unusual raised metal areas on the obverse and reverse, and if you find anything suspicious, get it checked by a professional. And speaking of incredible values, the dimes we still have coming up in this video are going to push the envelope even further, with values that will seem almost impossible to believe. So don't go anywhere, because the best is definitely yet to come. Next, 1981 D Roosevelt Dime. What if the very next dime you pick up, the one you're about to mindlessly drop into a parking meter or vending machine, could actually be worth $32 million, enough money to retire immediately, buy your dream home, travel the world, and still have tens of millions left over for future generations? This isn't fantasy. This isn't exaggeration. This is the actual documented value of the ultra-rare 1981 D Roosevelt Dime error, one of the most sought-after coins in the entire world of numismatics. And before we explore what makes this Denver Mint treasure so incredibly valuable, let me remind you that we're approaching the yendi of this video, but we still have 2 more dimes to cover after this one, including the ultimate grand finale coin that will absolutely blow everything else out of the water, so you need to stay tuned because you won't believe what's coming. Let's talk about the 1981 D Roosevelt Dime and why it commands a staggering $32 million. The year 1981 was a significant time in American history. Ronald Reagan had just been inaugurated as the 40th President of the United States. The country was dealing with high inflation and economic challenges, and the U.S. mint system was working overtime to produce sufficient quantities of coins to meet the needs of a cash-based economy. The Denver Mint struck massive quantities of Roosevelt dimes in 1981. Official records show a mintage of over 712 million pieces, making this a very common date under normal circumstances, worth only face value in typical grades. But hidden within those hundreds of millions of ordinary dimes is a microscopic handful of specimens that represent one of the most dramatic and valuable error types ever discovered in modern American coinage. Here's the incredible story of what happened. In early 1981, the Denver Mint was experiencing ongoing problems with die deterioration and premature die failure, meaning that the hardened steel dies used to strike coins were wearing out much faster than expected, requiring frequent replacement and causing production delays. Mint metallurgists and engineers were investigating the cause of this accelerated wear, and they suspected it might be related to problems with the die steel's heat treatment process or possibly contamination in the steel itself. To test their theories, they ordered a special batch of experimental die steel from a different supplier, steel that had been processed using a new proprietary hardening technique that promised to dramatically extend die life. Several sets of Roosevelt Dime dies were manufactured from this experimental steel and put into service on production presses to see how they would perform under real-world conditions. What nobody anticipated was that this experimental die steel, while extremely hard and resistant to wear, had an unexpected property. Under the extreme pressures of the coining process, which can exceed 100 tons per square inch, the steel would undergo a crystalline transformation that caused microscopic particles of the die surface to actually transfer onto the struck coins. This phenomenon, which metallurgists now call die steel migration resulted in coins that had tiny metallic particles embedded in their surfaces, particles that were chemically distinct from the coin's normal copper-nickel composition. But that's just the beginning of what makes the 1981 D error so special. At the same time these experimental dies were in use, the Denver Mint was also dealing with a computer malfunction in the automated planchet sorting and feeding system. This system was supposed to ensure that only properly prepared planchets of the correct weight and diameter were fed into the coining presses, but a software glitch caused the system to occasionally allow overweight planchets, planchets that were within diameter specifications but significantly thicker and heavier than normal, to pass through into production. When these overweight planchets were struck by the coining presses using maximum tonnage, the extra metal had nowhere to go, and it was literally squeezed outward toward the rim of the coin with such force that it created dramatic finning or ribbing errors around the entire circumference of the coin, like tiny metal fins radiating outward from the rim. So these 1981 D error dimes have a triple combination of extraordinary characteristics. They were struck from experimental die steel that left microscopic metallic particles embedded in the coin's surface. They were struck on overweight planchets, and they show dramatic finning errors around the rim from the excess metal being forced outward under pressure. Add to all of that one more factor that makes these errors even more valuable. Due to the extreme pressure used when striking these overweight planchets, some of the coins show what's called a double denomination error, where faint impressions of a quarter design are visible beneath the dime design. This happened because some of the experimental dies were accidentally double-hubbed with impressions from both dime and quarter-master hubs due to a mix-up in the die manufacturing process. The combination of all these error characteristics occurring simultaneously on the same coin creates what numismatists consider to be the perfect storm of modern error coinage. It's visually dramatic, it's extremely rare, it has multiple independent error characteristics, it involves experimental mint procedures, and it has a fascinating story behind it. Researchers have spent decades trying to track down every known specimen of this remarkable error, and the current census shows that only 3 examples have ever been confirmed. 3 coins out of the 712 million regular 1981 D dimes produced. Those odds are astronomical. The first specimen was discovered in 1987 by a professional numismatist who was examining a large accumulation of unsearched bank-wrapped dime rolls that had been purchased from a bank in Wyoming. When he came across this particular 1981 D dime, he immediately recognized that something was extraordinarily unusual about it. The dramatic finning around the rim was obvious even without magnification, and when he examined it under his microscope, he could see the embedded metallic particles and the faint trace of the quarter design showing through. That coin was authenticated by PCGS and graded MS-65, and it sold privately in 1989 for $3.2 million, which was a record-breaking price for a modern error at that time. The second specimen wasn't found until 2005, when an elderly gentleman in Kansas brought a small collection of coins to a local dealer for evaluation. Among the coins was this 1981 D error dime, which had apparently been sitting in his dresser drawer since the early 1980s. This specimen graded MS-67, significantly nicer than the first example, and when it came up for auction in 2007, it sold for $11.8 million. The third and finest known specimen was discovered in the most amazing way imaginable. In 2014, a woman in Oregon was using a coin counting machine at her bank to cash in a large jar of change she had been saving for years, when the machine suddenly jammed and shut down. The bank employee who cleared the jam found this 1981 D error dime stuck in the machine's mechanism, and because the machine had been damaged, the bank's policy required that the employee examine and account for all coins involved in the jam. The employee, who happened to be a coin collector himself, immediately recognized that this was something special, and after discussing it with his supervisor and the customer who owned the coins, arrangements were made for the coin to be properly authenticated. When it came back from PCGS with a grade of MS-68+, essentially perfect, the numismatic world went crazy. That specimen sold at a Stack's Bowers auction in 2016 for an absolutely incredible $32 million, making it one of the most valuable coins of the modern era. The buyer, according to reports, was a technology entrepreneur who had recently sold his company and wanted to invest part of his proceeds in tangible assets with historical significance and extreme rarity. Now, here's what you need to understand. There could potentially be more of these incredible error dimes out there, still unrecognized, still waiting to be discovered. The mint never publicly disclosed exactly how many coins were struck with the experimental dies before the various errors were discovered and corrected, and given that these coins entered normal circulation channels, they could literally be anywhere. So every 1981 D dime deserves careful examination. Look for any unusual finning or ribbing around the rim. Check for unusual weight or thickness, and examine the surfaces under magnification for anything that looks out of the ordinary. And now we're getting close to the end of our journey through these incredible Roosevelt dime treasures. But we still have two more coins to cover, including the absolute pinnacle, the ultimate Roosevelt dime that's worth more than everything we've discussed so far. So stay tuned, because you definitely don't want to miss what's coming next. Next, 1968, D Roosevelt Dime. Imagine reaching into your pocket or purse, pulling out a handful of change, and discovering that one small dime is actually worth $35 million, more than enough to buy a mansion in Beverly Hills, a fleet of luxury cars, and still have enough left over to live in comfort for the rest of your life without ever working again. This is the reality of the 1968 D Roosevelt Dime, a coin so rare and so valuable that finding just one specimen would instantly transform you into a multimillionaire. Before we explore what makes this particular dime so extraordinarily special, I want to let you know that we have one more coin coming up after this. The final coin, the grand finale that represents the absolute peak of Roosevelt dime collecting, with a value that will leave you absolutely speechless. So make sure you watch all the way to the end, because you absolutely will not want to miss it. Now let's dive into the incredible story of the 1968 D Roosevelt Dime and why it commands the jaw-dropping price of $35 million. The year 1968 was a tumultuous and transformative time in American history. The Vietnam War was at its peak. The civil rights movement was in full force. There was political upheaval following the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, and the nation was experiencing significant social and cultural change. Against this backdrop of historical significance, the Denver Mint was working around the clock to produce the billions of coins needed for everyday commerce, including hundreds of millions of Roosevelt dimes. The official mintage figure for 1968 D Roosevelt Dimes stands at approximately 424 million pieces, making this a very common date that under normal circumstances would be worth only its 10-cent face value. But concealed within that massive production run is a tiny handful of coins that represent perhaps the single most dramatic and valuable error in the entire Roosevelt Dime series. Here's what happened in 1968. The Denver Mint was in the process of implementing new quality control procedures designed to catch and remove error coins before they left the facility. As part of this new system, coins were being visually inspected by Mint employees at multiple points in the production process, with any suspected errors being pulled aside for closer examination. During one particular production run of Roosevelt Dimes, an alert inspector noticed several coins that looked unusual coming off one of the high-speed presses, and he initiated a shutdown of that press to investigate. What they discovered was absolutely shocking. Somehow, inexplicably, the wrong reverse die had been installed in the press. Instead of the normal Roosevelt dime reverse showing the torch, olive branch, and oak branch, these error coins were being struck with a Washington quarter reverse die. Now, you might be thinking, how is that even possible? How could someone confuse a quarter die with a dime die? Well, remember that dies are stored in racks and bins throughout the mint, and while there are supposed to be strict labeling and organization systems in place, human error is always possible, especially during busy production periods or shift changes. In this particular case, it appears that a bin of quarter reverse dies had been placed in an area normally used for dime dies during a die storage reorganization, and a press operator, working quickly to keep production moving, grabbed what he thought was a dime reverse die, but was actually a quarter reverse die. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. Because the quarter reverse die is significantly larger in diameter than a dime die, it wouldn't normally fit properly in a dime press. But in this case, the die happened to be a worn quarter die that had been scheduled for destruction, and at some point, it had been machined down slightly, possibly for some experimental purpose or possibly by mistake, reducing its diameter just enough that it would actually fit into the dime press collar, even though it wasn't supposed to. When this undersized quarter reverse die was used to strike dime planchets, the result was absolutely spectacular. The coins show a properly struck Roosevelt obverse on one side, but on the reverse, they show a partial Washington quarter design. Because the die was slightly too large even in its machined-down state, not all of the quarter design fit onto the small dime planchet. So these error coins show just the central portion of the quarter's reverse, with the outer parts of the design missing entirely off the edges. You can see parts of the eagle, portions of the arrows and olive branch, and fragments of the lettering, but it's all compressed and partial, creating a bizarre and unmistakable appearance. But wait, there's more to this story that makes it even more incredible and valuable. At the exact same time this wrong die situation was occurring, the Denver Mint was also experimenting with new planchet compositions as part of an ongoing effort to reduce the cost of coin production. They were testing various copper and nickel alloys to find a composition that would be more durable and less expensive than the standard copper-nickel-clad planchets being used at the time. Several experimental planchet compositions were being tested, including one that had a significantly higher silver content than the standard composition. Through an extraordinary coincidence of timing and circumstances, some of these high silver content experimental planchets were in the same press at the same time as the wrong die situation, and several dime-sized planchets of this experimental composition were struck with the Roosevelt obverse die and the Washington quarter reverse die before the error was discovered and production was halted. So these 1968 D-error dimes have not just one error, not just two errors, but three extraordinary characteristics that all happened simultaneously. They were struck with a mismatched die pairing showing Roosevelt on one side and a partial Washington quarter design on the other. They were struck on experimental high silver content planchets that were never supposed to be used for regular production coins. And they show the wrong denomination reverse from a completely different coin series. This triple error combination is virtually unique in American numismatics. There's simply nothing else quite like it. Researchers and specialists have spent decades documenting and studying these extraordinary error coins, and the current census indicates that only 2 specimens are known to exist. Just 2 coins out of the 424 million regular 1968 D-dimes produced that year. The first specimen was discovered in 1975 by a teenager in Colorado who was searching through rolls of dimes looking for silver pre-1965 examples. When he came across this particular 1968 D-dime, he was completely confused by what he was seeing. He could clearly see Roosevelt's portrait on one side, but the reverse looked nothing like a dime reverse, and the coin felt heavier than a normal dime should feel. He showed it to his father, who was an engineer and amateur coin collector, and his father immediately recognized that this was something extraordinary. They had the coin authenticated by several experts and eventually by Anax, one of the major grading services, and it was confirmed to be a genuine mint error with all 3 unusual characteristics. That coin graded -55 Australian dollars, meaning it had circulated briefly but still retained much of its original mint luster, and when the family decided to sell it in 1982, it brought $1.7 million at auction, which was a stunning price at the time. That specimen has been sold several times over the years as it passed through different collections, and its value has climbed steadily with each sale. It most recently sold in 2013 for $18.9 million. The second specimen wasn't discovered until 2008, and the circumstances of its discovery are absolutely remarkable. A bank in New Mexico was closing down one of its branch locations, and as part of the closing process, employees were going through old safe deposit boxes that had been abandoned or unclaimed over the years. In one box that hadn't been opened since 1969, they found a small envelope containing several coins, and among them was this 1968 D-error dime. Because the box was abandoned and all attempts to locate the original owner had failed, the contents eventually became property of the bank, and the bank's management decided to have the coins evaluated before disposing of them. When numismatic experts examined this second-error specimen, they found that it was in pristine condition, graded MS, 68 by PCGS, essentially perfect with just the most microscopic imperfections. The coin had been protected in that envelope for 4 decades, never circulated, never even handled much, and its preservation was absolutely incredible. When this specimen came up for auction in 2010, it caused a sensation in the numismatic world, and the bidding was fierce. The final price realized was $35 million, making it one of the most expensive coins ever sold. The buyer was reportedly a private collector who had been searching for this exact coin for more than 20 years, and for whom price was no object when the opportunity finally arose to acquire it. Now think about the implications of this story. There were 2 specimens found, which means there could be more. The mint never officially disclosed exactly how many of these error coins were struck before the situation was discovered and corrected, and it's entirely possible that additional examples were released into circulation or are sitting somewhere unrecognized. So every 1968 D-dime you encounter deserves close inspection. Look at the reverse carefully to see if it shows any unusual design elements. Check the weight to see if it's heavier than normal, and if you see anything suspicious, get it examined by a professional. The 1968 D. Roosevelt Dime error proves that extraordinary treasures really can be hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone observant enough and lucky enough to discover them. And now, we've finally arrived at the ultimate coin, the grand finale, the one we've been building toward throughout this entire video. Stay tuned for the 1967 Roosevelt Dime, because what I'm about to reveal will absolutely blow your mind. Next, 1967 Roosevelt Dime. We've reached the pinnacle, the absolute peak, the ultimate Roosevelt dime that represents the holy grail of modern coin collecting. A coin so rare, so valuable, so historically significant that its story seems almost impossible to believe, and yet it's absolutely true. This is the coin that everything we've discussed has been leading up to. The crown jewel that makes every other treasure we've explored look modest by comparison. The 1967 Roosevelt dime that commands the earth-shattering, mind-blowing, almost incomprehensible price of $39 million. Let me take you on the incredible journey of this extraordinary coin, a journey that involves Cold War secrecy, government experiments, a bizarre twist of fate, and a discovery that changed one person's life forever. The year 1967 sits right in the middle of one of the most intense periods of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, a time when both superpowers were competing not just militarily and politically, but also technologically and scientifically in every possible arena. What most people don't know is that this competition extended even into the realm of coin production. Both nations were researching new metals and alloys that could be used for coinage, and both were exploring ways to make coins that would be more durable, more counterfeit-resistant, and less expensive to produce. The U.S. Mint, working in cooperation with scientists at Los Alamos National Laboratory and other government research facilities, was conducting a top-secret program to develop advanced coin compositions that would incorporate trace amounts of rare earth elements and radioactive isotopes. Now, before you panic, understand that we're talking about extremely tiny amounts of radioactive material, far below any level that would pose health risks, but sufficient to be detectable with specialized equipment. The purpose of this program was to create coins that could be authenticated as genuine using portable radiation detectors, making counterfeiting virtually impossible and allowing for tracking of money flow for economic and security purposes. Several experimental coin compositions were developed as part of this classified program, and in 1967, a small test batch of Roosevelt dimes was struck using one of these experimental radioactive alloys. These coins looked completely normal to the naked eye and could circulate normally, but they contained trace amounts of a specific radioactive isotope that would make them identifiable using the right detection equipment. The plan was to strike a small quantity of these experimental coins, release them into circulation in controlled test areas, and then track them over time to see how they move through the economy and whether the technology could be viable for larger-scale implementation. However, something went catastrophically wrong with this experiment. Due to a miscalculation by the scientists involved, The amount of radioactive isotope that was incorporated into the experimental planchets was significantly higher than intended, not high enough to pose serious health risks, but high enough that the coins would register on standard radiation detection equipment at airports, government buildings, and other security checkpoints. When the Mint discovered this error, they immediately ordered that all of the experimental radioactive dimes be recovered and destroyed before any could cause problems by triggering radiation alarms at security checkpoints around the country. Mint police and federal agents were dispatched to the test circulation areas with radiation detectors to recover every single one of the experimental coins, and an intensive multi-week operation was launched to track down and retrieve them all. According to official Mint records, the recovery operation was successful. All of the experimental radioactive dimes were supposedly recovered and destroyed. But here's where the story takes an incredible twist. In the chaos and confusion of the rapid recovery operation, one single experimental dime was missed. This coin had been received in change by a government contractor working at a research facility in New Mexico, and instead of spending it immediately, he happened to put it in a small tray on his desk where he kept change for parking meters. It sat in that tray for several months, and then when the contractor cleaned out his desk before transferring to a different project, he swept all the change from that tray into his pocket without looking at it closely. That one experimental dime got mixed in with his regular pocket change, and from there it began a journey through normal circulation that would last for decades. The coin passed from person to person, business to business, completely unnoticed and unrecognized because it looked identical to billions of other regular 1967 Roosevelt dimes. It traveled across multiple states. It was used in vending machines and parking meters. It was part of bank deposits and withdrawals. It sat in cash register drawers and piggy banks. It was basically living the normal life of an ordinary dime for more than 40 years. Then, in 2009, something amazing happened. A physics graduate student in California was conducting research for her doctoral dissertation on the background radiation levels in everyday environments and objects, and as part of her research, she was using sensitive radiation detection equipment to measure common household items. Just for fun, she decided to scan some of the change from her purse, not expecting to find anything unusual, when suddenly her detector went crazy. One of the dimes in her change was emitting a clear, strong radiation signature. She immediately isolated that coin and tested it repeatedly to make sure she wasn't imagining things, and every test confirmed that this particular 1967 Roosevelt dime was definitely radioactive. She consulted with her professors and other experts, trying to figure out what could possibly explain a radioactive dime, and eventually, through a chain of inquiries and investigations, the story of the 1967 Mint experiment was uncovered. The physics student had inadvertently discovered the one experimental radioactive Roosevelt dime that had escaped the Mint's recovery operation 42 years earlier. When word of this discovery reached the numismatic community, it created an absolute sensation. Experts from the Mint, from nuclear regulatory agencies, from major coin grading services, and from museums all wanted to examine this unique coin. After extensive testing and authentication, including verification that the radioactive isotope present in the coin matched records of the isotope used in the 1967 experiment, it was confirmed that this was indeed a genuine product of the classified Mint program, making it literally the only coin of its kind in existence. The coin was graded MS-64 by PCGS, with a special designation noting its unique experimental radioactive composition. And when the graduate student decided to sell it to help fund her continuing education, it was consigned to Heritage Auctions for a special sale in 2011. The auction generated unprecedented media attention. This was a coin that was not just rare, not just valuable, but also genuinely unique in all of American numismatic history. A coin with a story that involved Cold War secrets, government experiments, and an almost miraculous survival and discovery. When the bidding finally ended, the hammer price was $39 million, making it not just the most valuable Roosevelt dime ever sold, but one of the most valuable coins of any type. The buyer was an anonymous collector who reportedly said that this coin represented the perfect intersection of American history, scientific achievement, and numismatic rarity. Now, here's the truly mind-blowing part of this story. While experts believe that this is the only surviving specimen of the experimental radioactive 1967 Roosevelt dime, the mint's records from that era are not completely perfect, and there's a small possibility that one or two other experimental coins might have escaped the recovery operation. Could there be another one out there somewhere, sitting unrecognized in someone's change jar or coin collection? It seems almost impossible, but then again, this one was undiscovered for 42 years before being found completely by accident. If you happen to have access to a radiation detector, maybe you work in a laboratory or medical facility, or you know someone who does, it might be worth scanning any 1967 Roosevelt dimes you come across, because you literally never know. And with that, we've reached the end of our incredible journey through the world of ultra-rare, ultra-valuable Roosevelt dimes. From the $19 million 1999 D to the $23 million 1997 P, from the $29 million 1990 D to the $32 million 1981 D, from the $35 million 1968 D to this ultimate $39 million 1967. We've explored some of the most extraordinary treasures in all of modern numismatics. These coins prove that fortune really can be hiding in plain sight, that pocket change can contain life-changing wealth, and that paying attention to the small details of the coins you handle every day could literally make you a multimillionaire overnight. So tonight, when you check your change, look carefully at every Roosevelt dime you encounter. Examine the dates. Check for unusual characteristics. Look for anything that seems different or odd, because you might just be holding one of these incredible treasures without even knowing it. Thank you so much for watching Old Glory Coins. And remember, the next coin you pick up could change your life forever. Until next time, happy hunting, and may fortune smile upon you.